Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take a hugely complex, world-changing figure and we really crack open the source material.
All of it. The biographies, the interviews, the technical notes.
And we distill it all down. We're trying to turn that feeling of information overload into some real immediate insight for you.
And today, we are really undertaking a deep dive into the formative crucible of one of the most consequential and, let's be honest, most polarizing industrial titans of our time.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and our sources, they give us this almost forensic timeline. I mean, it starts right from his youth, and you can trace these psychological drivers, these repeating patterns.
And you see them showing up everywhere, right, across this wildly diverse portfolio of companies.
Exactly. From rockets and electric cars to now social media and even brain interfaces.
Yeah.
It's all there.
That's right. So our mission today is to get past the headlines. We want to understand the foundational mechanics of the man. How did a childhood that was frankly defined by trauma, how did that, coupled with this cosmic worldview, pave the way for such audacious entrepreneurship?
And I think more importantly, how do those early forces explain the chaos? The high-intensity leadership style that is, it's an undeniable byproduct of his success.
Exactly. We're looking for the why behind all that chaos.
So to do that, we have to start with the environment that shaped him. And crucible is really the perfect word.
Yeah.
The sources describe South Africa in the 1980s as, not just a difficult place to grow up, but extremely violent.
Yeah.
It was often a terrifying backdrop to everyday life.
We're talking about the height of apartheid tensions, right? So civil unrest, random extreme violence was just normal.
It was normal. And the sources include this one anecdote that is just so visceral. It paints this picture of, casual horror.
This is the story with him and his brother, Kimball.
That's the one. They were heading to an anti-apartheid concert, I think it was near a train station, and they had to walk around, and in some parts, through the scene of a knife killing.
It's hard to imagine.
And the detail that makes it stick is horrifyingly mundane. They literally had to wade through a pool of blood next to a dead person, and the knife was still sticking out of his brain.
Oh, man.
But the lasting impression what the source material says really stuck with them wasn't just seeing the body. It was the physical reality of the blood.
The sticky sneakers.
The sticky sneakers.
Yeah.
For the rest of that evening, the residue on their shoes made this distinct sound on the pavement, that casual proximity to death.
Mm.
It just normalizes an extreme level of threat.
So that's the external violence of the country. But then you have the trauma that was much, much closer to home. And it starts with this profound act of betrayal.
The German Shepherd attacked dogs.
Yeah. The family had these dogs trained to go after anyone running near the property. And when Elon was only 6, his favorite one, it attacked him.
And it wasn't a nip. It took a massive, deep bite out of his back.
A huge bite. But the physical attack, that was really just the beginning of the emotional scar, wasn't it?
Absolutely. He's rushed to the emergency room, bleeding heavily, needs stitches. But the 6-year-old in him, he resists the treatment. He won't let them do anything until the adults promise him repeatedly that the dog won't be punished.
He specifically asks, "You're not going to kill him, are you?"
Yeah.
And they swear they won't. They give him that moment of safety.
And this is the gut punch. This is the betrayal. When he recounts this story years later, the source says he just pauses. He stares vacantly for a long time. The trauma is still so raw. And then he just says, then they damn well shot the dog dead.
Wow.
And that incident, you have to see it as a psychological cornerstone. That immediate violent punishment, the instant breaking of a solemn promise made to a terrified kid. It just instills this profound distrust of conventional authority.
If the people you trust the most can do that, why would you ever rely on established systems?
Exactly. Whether it's doctors or engineers or government regulators, you can draw a direct line from that moment to his later skepticism of everything. Centralized authority, military test specs, financial regulations.
It all comes back to that. It created this need for radical self-reliance.
They had to.
And then, on top of that, there was the schoolyard. The sources point out he was always the youngest and the smallest kid in his class. He struggled with social cues.
Lacked that natural instinct to be, ingratiating or charming.
Which made him the perfect target.
A perfect target. He was picked on regularly, punched in the face, just relentless physical torment.
And he said later, if you have never been punched in the nose, you have no idea how it affects you the rest of your life. That school was just a landscape of misery for him.
But the sources are really insistent on this point. Those physical scars, they were secondary. Secondary to the deep emotional wounds inflicted by his father, Elon Musk,
who the sources describe as this road engineer, a charismatic fantasist, but also just emotionally volatile.
And Errol's reaction to the worst of the school fights is maybe one of the most appalling details in the whole story.
So Elon comes home severely injured, expecting some comfort.
And his father sides with the bully.
He sides with the bully.
Yeah. His reasoning was just bizarre. He claimed Elon had this tendency to call people stupid, and because the bully's father had recently committed suicide, Errol said he couldn't possibly blame the other kid. It's a complete inversion of what a father should do.
And it gets worse. When he comes back from the hospital, his father makes him stand for an hour, just yelling at him, calling him an idiot, saying he was just worthless.
And Kimball, his brother, who saw the whole thing, he called it the worst memory of his life, specifically saying Errol showed zero compassion.
That emotional violence, it was just a constant pattern, right? Errol's verbal abuse towards their mother, May, was also continuous.
Right, even after her own mother, Winifred, had to step in to stop him from being physically violent. He would just tell May she was boring, stupid, and ugly.
So the whole environment was just psychological warfare.
Total insecurity. And you have to connect this sustained trauma directly to his professional drive later on. The sources are explicit about this. When he's in a dark place, when he feels threatened by short sellers or regulators,
He goes right back to the playground.
he recalls the absolute horrors of being bullied and powerless on that playground. And the psychological conclusion is crystal clear. Now he has the resources, the power, the influence to own the playground.
So this massive ambition, it isn't just about money.
It's not about capital. It's a direct psychological response. It's a mechanism to make sure he is unassailable, untouchable, supremely powerful, to make sure he is never again at the mercy of physical or emotional abusers.
But on the other side of the family, you have a completely different kind of intensity,
A very different kind. A deep-seated attraction to risk and adventure.
which he gets from his mother's side, right? Specifically, his grandfather, Joshua Haldeman.
Yes, Haldeman was a classic Depression-era daredevil. I mean, he was a cowboy, a rodeo performer, a construction hand. At one point, he was even a stowaway on an ocean ship.
And he lost his farm in the Depression in the 30s, which I guess that instills a certain kind of economic populism in you, a history of volatile financial risk.
For sure. And that adventurous spirit, it also went into his political life, which was complicated. Haldeman rose to become the chair of the National Council of the Social Credit Party.
Now, for listeners who haven't heard of this, the Social Credit Party was a political movement that was pushing for pretty drastic economic reform.
The core theory is that economic crises happen because people just don't have the purchasing power to buy what the economy produces.
So the government should just issue social credit to citizens, distribute wealth based on productivity.
Exactly. It was a wildly unconventional, very populist, and often, fringe idea.
And the sources do note that this movement, especially under its original Canadian leader, had this conservative fundamentalist streak. And tragically, it was tinged with anti-Semitism.
Yeah, stemming from complaints about, and this is a quote, a disproportionate number of Jews occupy positions of control.
So the family background is just this turbulent mix of everything. Physical violence, emotional abuse, intellectual genius, and this radical, unconventional political audacity.
It's all in there. So moving away from the trauma for a second, we have to look at the intellectual life that became his escape.
Because despite all the chaos at home, his mind was already, operating on a cosmic scale.
To his mother and sister, he was the genius boy. To almost everyone else.
Just an annoying nerd.
Just an annoying nerd.
Oh.
And that difference is perfectly captured in that famous story about the moon.
Right, he's with a cousin, they're looking at the night sky, and the cousin says the moon must be 1,000,000 miles away.
And Elon instantly, no inflection, just replies, no, it's like 239,000 miles, depending on the orbit.
It's that meticulous, a little clinical, and very socially awkward need for absolute precision. That was his early intellect.
He was a prodigious reader, obsessive. He didn't just read novels. He devoured both sets of his father's encyclopedias.
But the real foundation of his cosmic view came from some very specific books.
He found a book in his father's office that described future inventions, things like rockets propelled by an ion thruster.
And he said he read that book over and over again after school. And years later, late one night at his rocket base in South Texas, he could still recount the mechanics of an ion thruster.
And he said, very clearly, That book is what first made me think about going to other planets. So this wasn't just imagination for him, it was an early blueprint.
His intellectual life was really his psychological life raft, wasn't it?
Completely. He credits Douglas Adams's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy with pulling him out of what he called his existential depression.
And that philosophy that the universe is chaotic, absurd, and indifferent, but you should just meet it with droll humor, that really shaped his approach.
It did. And then you get the heavier science fiction. He directly links the creation of SpaceX to the philosophy in Isaac Asimov's Foundation series and the Zeroth Law.
Okay, this is a crucial point. We should probably unpack this for you.
Absolutely. So the Foundation series is all about psychohistory, a science that lets you predict large societal movements. And it's about how you can steer civilization back toward enlightenment after a dark age.
And for Musk, colonizing Mars is that civilization-saving action.
Exactly. And the Zeroth Law of robotics, which was a concept Asimov added later, is even more critical. It overrides all the other laws of robotics.
And it states, a robot may not injure humanity or, through inaction, allow humanity to come to harm.
And Musk interprets this not just as a rule for robots, but as a mandate for humanity itself. His work at SpaceX is framed as him fulfilling the Zeroth Law.
Ensuring humanity doesn't succumb to existential risks. Asteroids, supervolcanoes, rogue AI.
All of it. That mission mandate is the engine for everything that comes later.
So to realize any of these cosmic ambitions, he first needed a physical escape. At 17, he was desperate to leave South Africa.
And when neither of his parents seemed interested in moving to the U.S., he just decided, well, I'm just going to go by myself.
And he acted with this almost chilling efficiency. He went to the Canadian consulate and got passport forms not just for himself,
but for his mother, Kimball, and Tuska. A silent act of family rescue.
And crucially, he did not get forms for his father.
A very telling detail.
Yeah.
And the pragmatism was already there. He waited 2 weeks to leave because the plane tickets were cheaper if you bought them 14 days in advance.
And his father's parting words, just dripping with contempt. You'll be back in a few months. You'll never be successful.
Just brutal. And when he gets to Canada, his life is initially just marked by extreme vulnerability.
Coming from hyper-violent South Africa, he slept on his backpack at a youth hostel for weeks.
Until I realized that not everyone was a murderer. His words. The struggle was immediate and it was real.
And that struggle gave him an early, formative lesson in how inefficient systems are.
The traveler's checks.
Right. On a long Greyhound bus trip, he lost his suitcase with his traveler's checks in it, and the weeks-long bureaucratic nightmare to replace them.
It gave him an early, profound taste of why the financial payment system needed a serious disruption. That's the direct precursor to X.com and PayPal.
The financial scarcity was real for the whole family, too. When they eventually moved in together in a one-bedroom apartment.
His mother, May, broke down crying once after spilling milk because they couldn't afford to buy more. That period of intense, shared struggle really underscores the high stakes of his future risks.
So when he gets to college, the pragmatism of the nerd sort of gives way to wanting a normal social life.
He had a choice between the super technical Waterloo and Queen's University.
And he chose Queen's for the social life. For the girls, he said he didn't want to spend his undergrad years with a bunch of dudes.
Even in his studies, he was strategic. He'd get B's in classes like industrial relations, admitting he wouldn't put effort into things he thought were meaningless.
But then in a business simulation game, he shows this early knack for reverse engineering systems.
Right. He figured out the logic controlling the simulation, the hidden variables, and he won every single time.
Yeah.
The lesson being, if the rules are arbitrary, exploit them.
And that pattern just continued during his Scotiabank internship with Kimball.
They famously cold called interesting people to have lunch with them, using the internship as a pretext.
But the core takeaway from that whole experience was huge for him. He realized the banking industry was a lot dumber than in fact it was.
And that realization led to what he called a healthy disrespect for the financial industry. It gave him the sheer audacity he needed to start X.com later.
If he didn't respect the establishment, he wasn't afraid to challenge it.
And crucially, he learned then that he intensely disliked working for other people. He just wasn't suited for it.
So his eyes are now set on the future. He defers his enrollment at Stanford and goes straight to Silicon Valley.
He saw bankers and lawyers as people who didn't really contribute much to society.
And his first company, Zip2, was born from an insight he got during a lecture about NYNEX's failed online Yellow Pages idea.
Musk realized he could combine business listings with map data, the virtual city navigator. This required serious bootstrapping.
Living in the office, showering at the YMCA. This early period just reinforced the idea that extreme hardship was necessary for extreme results.
And he had to rely on his family financially. Errol gave him $28,000, and May gave him $10,000 and access to her credit card. And Elon wrote the complex code that made it all work.
But the strategic conflict at Zip2, that really foreshadowed all his future battles with professional management.
He desperately wanted Zip2 to be a consumer brand. He bought City.com and wanted to sell directly to users. He wanted the glory, the brand recognition.
But the investors and the professional managers, they overruled him.
They relegated Zip2 to being an unbranded vendor, just supplying content to big newspaper companies. This diminished his role, and it led to the eventual sale to Compaq for $307 million cash.
And Elon's personal cut was $22 million.
The source material notes he was just astonished. He saw his bank account jump from about $5,000 to $22 million and $5,000.
That immediate influx of capital confirmed his ability to challenge systems. And his one big indulgence,
A $1 million McLaren F1 sports car.
it's the first taste of what wealth could buy, right? Juxtaposed against him being on CNN talking about showering at the Y just 3 years earlier.
So with $22 million in hand, most people would, maybe take a break.
Or retire.
Or retire. But for him, the question was immediate. Live like a millionaire. Or put the chips back on the table and raise the stakes.
And he chose the latter. He dove straight into X.com, investing $12 million of his own money. He was determined to finally disrupt the banking industry.
X.com quickly merged with Peter Thiel's company, Confinity, which was focused on peer-to-peer payments, and this led to conflict, again, just like at Zip2.
Right. The venture capitalist convinced him to step aside as CEO for Bill Harris, the former head of Intuit.
But the real bonding happened in the trenches. Yeah. Musk, Peter Thiel, and Max Levchin formed what the sources call a nerd bond. They were united by their mutual disdain for what they saw as Bill Harris's overly extreme extrovert behavior.
And his perceived lack of technical understanding.
Right, and this period at X.com really crystallized Musk's management philosophy that he would carry everywhere. You have to merge design and engineering.
He restructured the company so designers weren't operating in a vacuum.
They had to feel the immediate pain if something they designed was going to be difficult or costly to engineer. It just collapses the feedback loop and maximizes efficiency.
But this intense focus on the product led, ironically, to his most famous political defeat, the honeymoon ousting.
He had been working relentlessly, and he finally decided to take a long-delayed honeymoon in September of 2000.
And while he was gone, Peter Thiel and Max Levchin plotted and executed a coup. They held an email vote, and when he returned, he'd been removed as CEO.
The timing was brutal, clearly premeditated.
So after all that, after he finally takes a break, that's when they do it. The sources say he was completely blindsided, right?
He was blindsided, but what's really fascinating is his reaction to this ultimate betrayal. He showed this unexpected, profound grace.
He told his supporters not to resign in protest.
Exactly. He's used this powerful analogy. The company was my baby, and like the mother in the Book of Solomon, I was willing to give it up so it could survive.
He prioritized the mission over his own ego. That's a huge growth moment.
It's a huge one. And later, any bitterness he had just subsided, he realized getting cooped was good for him. He said if he'd stayed CEO, he'd still be slaving away at PayPal, stuck in microfinance instead of reaching for Mars.
And the sale of PayPal to eBay netted him around $250 million.
And that $250 million, that gave him the ultimate freedom, the capital for the leap from code and money to heavy industry, to rocketry.
But before the genesis of SpaceX, he had a pretty close brush with death that kind of confirmed his existential fears.
He contracted falciparum malaria, the most dangerous, fast-moving form, after a trip.
And doctors initially misdiagnosed it as meningitis.
By the time they got it right, he was so weak he could barely stand. And with that parasite, you often have only a day or two before it becomes untreatable and you die.
So the sources suggest this wasn't just a physical scare. It confirmed his fear of extinction. It accelerated the urgency of the Mars mission.
Immediately. It sharpened his focus on needing a backup plan for civilization. He articulated 3 huge, epoch-making reasons for the space mission, all stemming from his reading and his existential dread.
1. Making life multiplanetary is the next great milestone for human consciousness.
2. Protecting Earth from extinction events, fulfilling that Zeroth law.
And 3. Finding the truth and meaning of life, which echoes back to his escape, with Hitchhiker's Guide.
And what's so unique about how he starts these massive companies is that he doesn't begin with a business plan.
Right, one of the PayPal veterans said he starts with an epoch-making mission, a mandate from heaven, they called it, and then he figures out the money.
And this approach relies heavily on first principles thinking. This becomes foundational to SpaceX and Tesla, and is really vital for you to grasp.
Okay, let's unpack that. Normally, when you build a rocket, you rely on analogy. You ask, what did the last contractor charge for this part? First principles is the opposite.
Exactly. Instead of analogy, you deconstruct the problem down to its most fundamental parts. If you want to build a battery, you don't ask what a battery costs. You ask what the raw materials, lithium, cobalt, nickel cost on the commodities market.
So you calculate the cost of the raw materials plus assembly.
And if that total is drastically lower than the market price of the finished battery, you know the market is inflated. You have an opportunity to disrupt it by building it yourself.
That rigorous, skeptical, bottom-up approach is what allowed him to go from building websites to building rockets.
Armed with that philosophy, his first step was the disastrous Russia trip in 2002. He went to buy decommissioned missiles. And his inexperience with the culture and the sheer arrogance of his ambition, it showed.
There was a long diplomatic lunch, lots of vodka toasts, and Musk passed out, his head slamming into the table.
A massive cultural faux pas. But the real insult came later.
When he started talking about making humans multiplanetary, a high-ranking Russian official got visibly upset.
Shouted, "This rocket was never meant for capitalists to use it for going to Mars on a bullshit mission." And Jim Cantrell, who was there, said the official, then spat at them.
That humiliation just reinforced his resolve. If they won't sell me rockets, I'll build them myself. Cheaper and better.
His first pivotal hire was Tom Mueller, a model rocket enthusiast who worked at TRW. Mueller became head of propulsion, but their negotiation really established a core belief about partnership.
Mueller wasn't an internet millionaire, so he insisted Musk put 2 years of his compensation into escrow as a hedge against failure.
And Musk agreed, but that request led him to classify Mueller as an employee, not a co-founder. It solidified his belief. Co-founders have to share the ultimate financial risk. You have to push your own chips onto the table.
If you want the title, you take the risk.
That philosophy, risk tolerance, and iterative design defined SpaceX. Mueller said their approach was aggressive. Move fast, blow things up, repeat.
They pushed engines until they broke, deliberately ignoring the tedious, conservative military test specs that just inflate costs and prolong development.
And this philosophy led inevitably to failure. The first 3 Falcon 1 launches failed. During the first one, Musk just exploded at Mueller, but then immediately did a 180 and put on Team America, world police, to soften the mood.
And he followed that internal chaos with this public, resolute statement. SpaceX is in this for the long haul. Come hell or high water, we're going to make this work.
It's that duality, the internal explosion followed by the external unwavering resolve. That's his crisis leadership.
But his management style also quickly incorporated personalized blame as a tool for learning.
Right, the rule that every single part must have a name attached to it. There's nowhere to hide from your mistakes.
And this system highlighted the mistake that caused that first failure, a tiny component known as the B-nut on a fuel line.
So a B-nut is basically just a specialized fitting, like a coupling that seals a critical fuel line connection.
And in this case, an engineer, Jeremy Holman, didn't properly torque or install this little nut.
Which meant the line came loose under stress, starved the engine, and the whole thing failed.
So a tiny $2 part cost the company a multi-million-dollar launch.
Exactly. And Musk made sure the entire company learned that lesson the hard way. He specifically named Holman and the B-nut mistake in a public symposium. The lesson was not subtle. Accountability is everything.
So despite 3 failures and being nearly broke, the breakthrough comes. The 4th Falcon 1 launch is successful.
And that validation paved the way for a crucial $1.5 billion NASA contract. A massive confirmation that his high-risk first principles approach was superior to the old guard aerospace industry.
And around the same time, he turns his attention back to Earth. He concluded electric cars were environmentally superior after doing one of his rigorous first principles analyses.
He made a detailed spreadsheet calculating energy efficiency all the way from the raw fuel source to the motor. And he concluded the overall efficiency of internal combustion was just abysmal compared to electric.
Which led him to invest $6.4 million in Tesla, becoming board chair, and the ultimate authority because he had majority equity.
And the early leadership team, Musk and the CEO, Martin Eberhard, was described as an inherently unstable molecule because Musk loved to dive deep into technical and aesthetic details.
One of the early conflicts was about design. Musk insisted on enlarging the roadster door, lowering the frame by 3 inches because he found the original too small.
He literally asked the team to consider, how is a woman even going to get in the car on a date without looking ridiculous?
But this revision, while probably correct from a design perspective, was incredibly costly. It added $2 million in production costs, and critically, it invalidated the Lotus crash certification.
And that's a signature move, right? Prioritizing an engineering or aesthetic ideal over the cost or regulatory structure.
The conflict really culminated in a marketing dispute. Musk was furious when a New York Times article didn't mention him and called Eberhard the chairman. He felt his strategic vision was being erased.
So to assert his role, he published the secret Tesla Motors master plan on the company's website. And this was a crucial document that laid out the long-term vision.
Enter the high-end market first, where customers will pay a premium and then use those profits to finance the ultimate goal: mass-market electric cars.
And that push to mass-produce the Model 3, that became the most intense, high-stakes challenge of his career, what he famously called production hell.
The goal seemed impossible, reaching 5,000 cars a week.
And Musk responded by physically moving his whole operation to the factory floor, 247. He had a singular focus and zero tolerance for any dissent.
Executives who said the goals were impossible were just fired on the spot.
He replaced them with what the sources call gung-ho captains, and at times he was literally sleeping on the factory roof. It wasn't just leadership. It was a physical manifestation of his will.
And this intense period, interestingly, led to a huge, painful pivot on automation.
He had initially been this apostle of complex robotics, believing a machine that builds the machine was the answer. But he realized the robots were failing at simple human tasks.
Like adjusting window seals or handling small variations in parts.
So he flipped to a radical de-automation crusade. They literally started sawing robots out of the production line. There's one story where they put a massive hole in the side of the building just to jettison useless equipment.
And that experience became foundational to his production algorithm that he still uses today.
Question all requirements, simplify the steps, and only automate as a last resort, not the first step.
The cost of all this speed and ambition, it nearly sank both companies multiple times.
In 2008, during the financial crisis, he kept Tesla afloat by dipping dangerously into customer deposits. He just said, we either do this or we die. Some board members questioned the legality, but he just pushed forward.
And that desperation extended to his inner circle. His brother Kimball sold his last $375,000 in Apple stock to invest in Tesla.
Even though his banker warned him he was destroying his own credit. That level of shared maximal financial risk was what kept the whole thing alive.
And this high-pressure environment fostered a management style that was polarizing, to put it mildly.
If you expressed negativity, you were just cut from the next meeting. But sometimes the consequences were far more shocking.
The story of the young engineer, Gage Coffin, is just brutal.
Summoned at 10 p.m. on a Saturday, fired on the spot after he couldn't answer Musk's repeated combative question, did you fucking do this?
And Coffin was just trying to clarify what Musk meant. The tooling, the design, the code. He was trying to apply logic to a purely emotional outburst.
And Musk saw that hesitation as insubordination, called him an idiot, and ordered him out. The sources highlight that in that context, 10 p.m. Saturday, high stress, there was zero room for rational discussion.
You see that same intensity applied to cost-cutting with the Raptor engine at SpaceX. Musk demanded the engine cost be cut to $200,000, a tenth of the current cost, and he personally took over as VP of Propulsion to drive it.
And this is where Lucas Hughes comes into the story. In one meeting, Musk just publicly reams out Hughes for not knowing the cost of a 2-cent part. He explodes, "You have very badly failed. This meeting is over. Done."
The pressure must have been insane. Hughes, who had gymnastics training, said he focused intensely on his composure to avoid just collapsing.
And instead of quitting, he fought back with data. He delivered this meticulous analysis on what they started calling the idiot index.
The idiot index measured the unnecessary complexity and expense of parts.
Right. It identified all the overly complex, expensive components that could be simplified or eliminated, like why use a complicated custom-machined weld when a simple bolt will do.
And this data-driven response, it worked. Hughes not only survived, he thrived. And the required changes fundamentally altered the engineering culture at both companies.
And the surprising twist is that Musk seemed to completely forget the traumatic confrontation afterward. But he started calling on Hughes by name in later meetings. The trauma served its purpose. It delivered the required data.
So this brings us to the core synthesis of his management style versus empathy.
His ex-wife, Justine Musk, noted his lack of empathy and emotional distance, but she also conceded that this very wiring, which included Asperger's, was paradoxically an advantage for running a high-performance company.
Michael Marks, another colleague, put it even more brutally. He said wanting to be everyone's friend means you care too much about individual emotions, which can ultimately harm the enterprise.
Because you avoid making the tough, mission-critical decisions. Musk's ability to prioritize the mission over individual feelings was seen as a necessary, if sometimes cruel, strength.
And unfortunately, his personal turmoil just continued to compound, fueled by his relationship with his father, Errol.
After a difficult meeting in Cape Town, where observers noted Elon's hand was visibly shaking, Errol later inflicted even more emotional damage.
Errol impregnated Jana, his own stepdaughter, who Elon and Kimball considered a half-sister.
It's an unbelievable familial horror.
And the depth of the emotional wounds is just clear in Elon's own words. He said of his father, "He was such a terrible human being. Almost every crime you can possibly think of, he has done. Almost every evil thing you could possibly think of, he has done."
That level of emotional pain, even decades later, it just highlights the lasting damage.
This pattern of personal turmoil feeding into professional stress, it culminated in that 2018 rupture with Kimball.
Kimball, who is arguably his closest emotional support, asked for a $10 million loan for his restaurant business. Elon initially agreed, but then changed his mind after his financial manager advised against it.
And Elon's final word to his brother was just brutal. It demonstrates that cold, enterprise-first logic. He said, "The money Elon was putting into it was getting poured down the drain. I think they should die."
This emotional distance and occasional recklessness is what prompted his friends, especially Kimball, to develop a term to signal when Musk's behavior was spinning out of control, going open loop.
And what does open loop mean in that context?
In control theory, an open loop system is one that lacks feedback. The output doesn't affect the input. When they applied it to Musk, it meant he was acting without caring for the outcome, divorced from rational consequence or emotional feedback.
So they used it during periods of intense stress, like the Amber Heard breakup or the pedo guy tweet.
It was a signal that his internal chaos was overwhelming his external judgment.
So as he stabilizes his existing companies, pushing them through production hell, his gaze shifts to new, seemingly disconnected missions.
Though they all seem to tie back to that zeroth law mandate, don't they?
They do. The Boring Company, for example, started with just frustration, being stuck in LA traffic. He just tweeted he was going to build a tunnel boring machine.
And the name itself was chosen with his signature Monty Python humor. Boring, it's what we do.
But Neuralink, that came from a deeper, more existential fear, the fear of AI going rogue.
And this is where we have to touch on the theory that deeply interested him and his former partner Grimes, Rocco's basilisk.
Okay, what exactly is Rocco's basilisk?
It's a philosophical thought experiment about the risks of a powerful AI. The core idea is that a future malevolent superintelligence, once it exists, would retroactively punish, maybe even torture, anyone who knew they could have helped create it sooner but chose not to.
So the goal of Neuralink tying AI closely to the human cortex is a way to prevent the system from going rogue, to mitigate that Rocco's basilisk threat while also accelerating human evolution.
Precisely. And that mission resonated deeply with Neuralink's co-founder, DJ CO, who moved from Korea to Louisiana as a kid and was always frustrated by his inability to express his thoughts efficiently because of the language barrier.
His whole mission became, how can I get this thing that's in my head out as efficiently as possible?
And then you have Optimus, the humanoid robot. The goal was to take fiction out of science fiction, inspired by things like Blade Runner.
And the design was very specific. 5'8", elfish and androgynous, so it wouldn't seem threatening.
The engineering challenges were extreme, like how to measure pressure in the robot's hands. After extensive testing, the team decided measuring pressure via current flow in the finger joint actuator was the most effective, simplest method.
A pure first principles solution.
Yeah.
Minimize parts, minimize complexity.
And Musk's anti-authority streak, which we saw back in his childhood, it surfaced sharply during COVID. He openly defied California's stay-at-home order at Fremont,
arguing that the economic harm and panic from the restrictions exceeded the harm from the virus itself, which pitted him, again, against established regulatory bodies.
His political evolution was publicly signaled with that cryptic tweet, "Take the red pill," marking his shift against progressive Democrats. And the sources say this shift was profoundly personal.
Fueled by his daughter Jenna's transition, her embrace of socialism, and her eventual rejection of him.
And that rejection clearly stung him deeply. His manager noted that Musk feels he lost a son who changed first and last names and won't speak to him anymore because of this woke mind virus.
So this personal loss became intertwined with his public political stance. He started seeing wokeness as a systemic ideological threat.
And his intense competitive nature translates easily from business to politics. His friends observed his gaming mentality. He became obsessed with the strategy game Polytopia, and he admitted it wired him for war, basically.
And the only way his brother Kimball could bond with him during this period was by learning to play the game himself.
This warrior mindset led directly to that dramatic conflict with Bill Gates. Musk was enraged that Gates had shorted Tesla stock, losing a reported $1.5 billion, while at the same time offering him philanthropy advice. He saw it as pure hypocrisy.
He texted Gates directly with that sharp question: "Do you still have a $500 million short position against Tesla?"
Gates admitted later that Musk was super mean, but also acknowledged that this behavior was consistent with how Musk treated anyone he felt had wronged him or the mission.
Which brings us to his most chaotic, impulsive, and financially draining move: the Twitter takeover.
He had initially agreed to join the board after the CEO, Parag Agrawal, urged him to. But the agreement had provisions that would have stopped him from criticizing the company publicly.
And that constraint lasted less than a week. He was in Hawaii, read a summary of Twitter's progress, and 1 minute later at 5 a.m., he sent that scathing text to Agrawal.
"I'm not joining the board.
Yeah.
This is a waste of time. We'll make an offer to take Twitter private."
His rationale for the hostile takeover was multi-layered. He believed Twitter needed to become the #1 global payment system, a resurrection of his X.com vision, and that it was vital for democracy and free speech.
But he also admitted that, conceptually, running Twitter wasn't nearly as hard as getting to Mars. The goal was more about fixing the societal operating system than tackling physics.
To immediately reshape the culture, he implemented what was called the Shackleton Expedition work requirement.
Employees were forced to opt into a new, hardcore work culture, long hours, maximum effort, by clicking yes on a link, or they could take 3 months severance and leave.
A huge gamble on loyalty, and a surprisingly high. 2,492 employees, 69% of the remaining workforce, chose to stay.
Which established an immediate, high-stakes tribal culture centered entirely on survival and the mission. It echoes the production hell days.
And the recklessness was immediate. The moment the deal closed, he fired the CEO and other top executives, cutting their email access instantly. Purely punitive and dramatic.
Then came the Sacramento Capers. He demanded the critical Sacramento data center be shut down immediately to cut costs, a process that usually takes months of meticulous planning.
And his cousin James and others were tasked with this impossible deadline. They were forced to recklessly roll server racks onto trucks using store-bought straps.
The previous record for the company was moving 30 racks in a month. They moved 700 in 3 days.
But this speed came at a huge technical cost. It demonstrates the danger of going open loop. Musk later admitted the shutdown was a mistake.
It caused meltdowns because they had 70,000 hard-coded references to Sacramento that they just weren't aware of. His high-intensity, immediate action philosophy crashed right into legacy code.
And despite his stated desire for unfettered free speech, his personal trauma drew a clear, absolute line when he had to decide whether to reinstate Alex Jones.
He refused.
His ultimate judgment on Jones was a direct reference to his own earliest, deepest wound: the loss of his firstborn child.
He said, "My firstborn child died in my arms. I have no mercy for anyone who would use the deaths of children for gain, politics, or fame."
And that was the rare instance where personal grief completely trumped the free speech mandate. It showed where his absolute moral red lines lie.
So we've really taken the deepest of deep dives today. We've traced the entire arc of this industrial titan, whose existence is this complex cocktail of visionary genius and raw, unresolved psychological impulse.
Well, rooted firmly in that traumatic South African childhood.
And the key synthesis here is that his life is entirely mission-driven. It's fueled by this internal mandate, whether it's multiplanetary consciousness or just building the fastest, cheapest engine using first principles.
And his high tolerance for chaos and risk is a direct result of that formative trauma, the psychological need to own the playground.
The duality is just stunning, isn't it? The man who can quote The Hitchhiker's Guide and apply the Zeroff law to rocket science.
is the same impulsive leader who fires an engineer at 10 p.m. on a Saturday or sends a scathing 5 a.m. text to launch a hostile takeover.
Ultimately, his life is molded out of faults. His triumphs and his failures are both epic in scale, and they both stem from this compulsion to aim impossibly high and tolerate chaos, both externally and internal.
He is clearly not good at sitting back.
No. His tendency is always to push his chips back on the table, to play the next most difficult level of the game.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. We've seen that for SpaceX, the lens of getting to Mars has motivated every decision. So if you consider his vast portfolio today, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, Twitter, what will be the ultimate final breakthrough? The single achievement that signals in his mind that he has finally succeeded in his decades-long quest to nurture the flame of human consciousness and finally find peace on the playground.
We'll leave that with you.